The dining room was warm with candlelight and the smell of roast turkey. My entire family was gathered around the table, dressed in our Christmas best. My father, Frank Walker, stood up at the head of the table, clinking his glass for attention. This was his tradition, the annual Christmas toast where he talked about family and success. He cleared his throat and smiled at my older brother, Scott, who was sitting across from me looking smug in his expensive suit. "This year has been incredible," my father began. Scott brought in the Dawson account, a $1 million deal that will carry Walker Realty into the new year. Everyone clapped. Scott nodded like a king accepting praise. Then my father's eyes slid over to me. His smile changed, became almost pitying. "It is a relief," he said, raising his glass higher, "to have at least one successful child." The words hung in the air like smoke. The clapping stopped. My mother gasped softly. Scott just smirked into his wine glass. I felt my heart crack right down the middle, but I did not make a scene. I just sat there, my smile frozen on my face, feeling very small. After the toast, a heavy silence settled over the table. The only sounds were forks scraping plates and the quiet crackling of the fireplace. My mother tried to lean over and whisper, "Honey, he did not mean it like that." But her eyes were filled with pity, which somehow felt worse than my father's words. I could see the victory in Scott's posture. He leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed, enjoying his moment. My father had moved on, already talking about business projections for next year like nothing had happened. Like he had not just told his entire family that I was a failure. I pushed food around my plate, the turkey tasting like dust in my mouth. I had spent my whole life in Scott's shadow. He was the star quarterback in high school, the finance major in college, the golden child who followed Dad into the family business. And me? I was the quiet, artistic daughter who chose graphic design. Dad called it a cute hobby. To him, I had chosen failure the day I decided not to join Walker Realty. I realized in that moment that nothing I ever did would be enough for him. Nothing. I could not stay in that house another minute. I mumbled something about a headache and excused myself from the table. I grabbed my coat from the front closet and walked out into the night. Outside, snow was falling heavily. It was a full Christmas blizzard, the kind that shut down the entire city. I sat in my car with the engine idling, watching my family through the warm, glowing windows. They were laughing again, moving on, probably relieved I had left so the evening could be comfortable again. I was on the outside looking in, literally and figuratively. That was when my work phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out and saw an urgent, encrypted message. It was from my boss at Apex, the design firm where I worked. The subject line simply read, "Vance. Critical. Call immediately." My heart started racing. Arthur Vance was my biggest, most secret client. And if he needed me on Christmas night, something major was happening. I put the car in gear and drove away from my childhood home, leaving them behind in more ways than one. I drove to a quiet, all-night coffee shop on the edge of town to take the call. My work for Apex was so confidential that I could not risk having conversations at home or anywhere public. I found a corner booth, ordered coffee I would not drink, and dialed my boss on the encrypted line. "Lauren, thank God," she said immediately. "Arthur Vance is trying to reach you. The launch is in crisis. The server crashed, and he has revised documents that need your approval tonight. He has been trying to find your address for the past 2 hours." I felt my stomach drop. Arthur Vance was not just any client. He was a legendary, reclusive investor whose name carried immense weight in the business world. The kind of man my father would kill to meet. And I was his lead visual brand strategist, working on the identity for his new $50 million global fund. "Where is he now?" I asked. My boss gave me the street name. My heart stopped. It was my parents' street. Arthur Vance was somewhere in my childhood neighborhood, in a blizzard, looking for me. I hung up and stared at my phone. The irony was almost too perfect. The man whose brand I was building, whose trust one had earned through years of careful, brilliant work, was lost on my father's street. The same father who had just announced to everyone that I was his unsuccessful child. I thought about my career at Apex. It was not just about making things look pretty. I crafted identities that moved markets. I built brands for Fortune 500 companies, celebrities, and people who demanded absolute privacy. My work was strategic, psychological, powerful. And Arthur Vance had chosen me specifically because he understood that. But my family had no idea. They thought I was just a graphic designer, someone who maybe made logos for local businesses. My father had never once asked about my actual work. The next morning, Scott had sent a group family text. It was a photo of him and Dad at the office, toasting with expensive scotch. The caption read, "Planning the next big win. Hope your designing is going okay, Lauren." The air quotes around designing were implied, and they cut like a knife. I had not replied. I had just opened the Vance project files and poured all my hurt into creating something flawless. I drove back toward my parents' house slowly, my windshield wipers struggling against the heavy snow. A few weeks earlier, I had a secure video call with Arthur Vance to review my initial concepts for his brand. He was an older man, probably in his 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and no patience for small talk. He looked at my designs for a long time without speaking. Then he gave a slow nod. "You understand that silence speaks louder than noise," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "This is perfect. You have a singular talent, Ms. Walker. Very few people in the world can do what you do." Hearing that from a man of his stature, a man whose opinion could make or break careers, meant more than 100 of my father's toasts ever could. But I had never told my family about Arthur Vance. I had never mentioned the high-profile clients or the projects that had won industry awards. Because what was the point? They had already decided who I was. They had already written my story. As I pulled onto my parents' street, I saw a car stuck in a snowdrift about 3 houses down. And standing next to it, looking frustrated, was a man in an elegant wool coat. Arthur Vance had found me. My phone rang before I could decide what to do. It was my mother. "Lauren, honey, where did you go? This blizzard is getting worse. Please come back. You should not be alone on Christmas." Her voice was worried, guilty. I could hear my father in the background asking who she was talking to. I made a split-second decision. "Mom, I am coming back. I need to work tonight anyway. Can I stay in the guest room?" She sounded relieved. "Of course, sweetheart. Your old room is always ready." I hung up and looked at Arthur Vance's car stuck in the snow. I knew what was about to happen. He was going to knock on doors, looking for me, looking for the address he had been given. And eventually, he was going to knock on my father's door. The stage was being set without anyone knowing it. I parked in my parents' driveway, grabbed my bag with my laptop and the encrypted hard drive containing all of Vance's materials, and walked into the house. My father was in the living room, pacing on the phone, yelling about the Dawson deal. Scott sat on the couch looking nervous. Something was wrong with their big win. But that was not my problem. Not anymore. The house was tense. I could feel it the moment I walked in. My father barely acknowledged me, still focused on his phone call. I heard words like permits and delays and falling apart. Scott was scrolling through his phone, his earlier smugness replaced with stress. My mother fussed over me, taking my coat, asking if I wanted tea, clearly trying to make up for dinner. But I could feel my father's dismissive energy even from across the room. I was still the unsuccessful child, even in his house. I took my bag upstairs to the guest room, then came back down and headed to the study. It was a wood-paneled room lined with books my father had never read, his big mahogany desk dominating the space. It was his sanctuary, his power room. "I need somewhere quiet to work," I told my mother. She nodded and ushered me in, closing the door softly behind me. I set up my laptop and pulled out the Vance files. I lost myself in the work, adjusting designs, reviewing the brand guidelines, preparing for whatever emergency had prompted this crisis. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, I was in my element, doing what I did best. And I had no idea that in less than an hour, everything was about to change. It was almost 10 p.m. when we heard it. A loud, insistent knocking at the front door. Not a polite knock. An urgent one. The kind that said someone needed help. I heard my father's heavy footsteps in the hallway, heard him muttering about who the hell is out in this weather. I stayed in the study listening. The front door opened, and I heard wind rushing in, and then a calm, cultured voice. My deepest apologies for the intrusion on Christmas evening. My car is stuck in the drift just down the lane. May I use your phone? I need to locate someone urgently. There was a pause. Then my father's voice, immediately shifting into his business mode, the charming host. Frank Walker of Walker Realty. Of course, come in, come in. You must be freezing. I heard footsteps, heard the door close. I heard my father offering coffee, asking questions. And then I heard that same calm voice say something that made my heart stop. Thank you. I am trying to locate my brand strategist. Her name is Lauren Walker. I was told she lives on the street, but the house numbers are impossible to see in this storm. I stood up from the desk, my hands suddenly shaking. This was it. This was the moment. I walked slowly to the study door and opened it just a crack. I could see into the foyer. Standing there, brushing snow off his elegant wool coat, was Arthur Vance. And standing next to him, his face a mask of complete confusion, was my father. My mother had appeared from the kitchen. Scott was standing in the living room doorway. They were all staring at this distinguished stranger who had just said my name. Lauren Walker, my father repeated slowly, like the words did not make sense. You are looking for my daughter? Arthur Vance looked up sharply. Your daughter? She lives here. My father was still processing. No. She lives across town. But she is visiting tonight because of the storm. Vance's face relaxed slightly. Excellent. Then I have found her. Is she available? I must speak with her immediately. We have a critical situation with a $50 million launch, and she is the only one who can resolve it. The number 50 million hung in the air. I watched my father's face go completely blank. Behind him, Scott's mouth had fallen open. This was better than anything I could have planned. I stepped out of the study and into the hallway. Arthur Vance saw me immediately, and his entire expression changed to relief. Ms. Walker, thank God. I have been trying to reach you for hours. I walked toward him, my professional calm settling over me like armor. Mr. Vance, I apologize for the difficulty. I had my work phone on silent during dinner. I glanced at my father, whose face was still frozen in shock. I see you have met my father. Vance turned to my father with a polite nod. I have, though I did not realize the connection. You have an exceptional daughter, Mr. Walker. Her work is the cornerstone of my firm's new global launch. Without her, none of this would be possible. My father tried to speak. His mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Scott had moved closer, staring at me like I was a stranger. My mother had her hand over her mouth, tears already forming in her eyes. The entire family was frozen in the hallway, and I was standing there, calm and professional, talking to a man whose name carried more weight than anything my father had built. This was real power. This was real success. And they were seeing it for the first time. Arthur Vance was still holding a sealed, confidential envelope. The server crashed this afternoon, he explained, speaking to me but loud enough for everyone to hear. I have revised documents that need your approval before we can proceed with the printing. We are on an impossible deadline. I apologize for tracking you down on Christmas, but you are the only person I trust with this. He looked at my father again, and there was something almost pointed in his gaze. Your daughter is not just a designer, Mr. Walker. She is a strategist. She builds empires of perception. Very few people in the world can do what she does. The board insisted on her specifically after seeing what she did for the Atlas project. Atlas. I saw my father's face go even paler. Atlas was a massive tech company, one of the biggest in the world. My father had tried for years to get a meeting with them, hoping to land their real estate portfolio. He had failed, and I had worked with them. I had built their brand identity, and he had never known. May we use a quiet room? Vance asked, turning back to me. We have about an hour of work to save this launch. I nodded. Of course. We can use the study. I led him back toward the room I had just left, and I could feel my family's eyes on us like physical weight. I closed the solid oak door of the study behind us, shutting out my family. The last thing I saw before the door clicked shut was their stunned faces huddled in the hallway, staring. For the next hour, Arthur Vance and I worked side by side at my father's prized mahogany desk. He spread out the documents, and I reviewed every detail, making notes, suggesting adjustments, approving the final versions. We worked in focused silence, the kind of productive quiet that comes from mutual respect and shared purpose. I could feel the rest of the house beyond that door. I could sense them out there, listening, waiting, trying to understand what was happening. The house was so quiet I could hear every word we said, and I knew they were hanging on every word. At one point, Vance said, his voice carrying, the board was insistent, Lauren. Only you. They saw what you did for Atlas, and they said no one else could capture the vision we needed. Atlas again. I heard a soft thud from the hallway, like someone had leaned heavily against the wall. I kept working, my face calm, my hands steady. This was my world. And for the first time, it was happening in my father's sanctuary. When we finally finished, Arthur Vance carefully packed up the approved documents and sealed them back in his confidential envelope. He shook my hand warmly, holding it for a moment longer than necessary. You have saved the launch, Lauren. The presentation is next week, but this was the critical piece. I will see you after the holiday for the final review. He smiled. And please take tomorrow off. You have earned it. I walked him to the front door. The entire family had somehow materialized in the living room, pretending not to watch, but obviously watching. Vance turned to my father one more time. Thank you for the shelter, Frank. The storm has passed enough that we can dig out the car. He looked my father directly in the eyes. You are a very lucky man. Your daughter is a genuine asset. In my world, people like her are irreplaceable. The word asset hung in the air. Not hobby. Not cute. Asset. My father managed to nod, his face pale. Thank you, he said, his voice barely audible. Vance walked out into the snowy night. His driver had appeared from somewhere and was clearing the car. I closed the door, and the house fell completely silent. The kind of silence that feels like a held breath. I turned around. My father was staring at me with wide eyes, his face a mixture of shock, shame, and something that looked almost like fear. My mother was crying softly, but these were different tears. Pride, confusion, regret. Scott was looking at the floor, his earlier victory completely erased. Nobody spoke. The silence stretched out, heavy and thick. I could have said something. I could have thrown his words back at him, made him feel small the way he had made me feel. But I did not. I just looked at him, letting him sit with the truth. Letting him understand that he had been wrong about me for my entire life. That while he was celebrating Scott's $1 million deal, I had been building something so much bigger. Something that people like Arthur Vance valued. Something real. I have work to finish, I said quietly. I am going to bed. I walked past all of them, past their staring faces, and went upstairs to the guest room. Behind me, I heard my mother start to say something, but my father cut her off. Just let her go, he said, his voice hollow. I closed the door to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking now, all the adrenaline finally catching up. It had happened. The truth had arrived, uninvited, at the worst possible moment for my father. And I had not had to say a word. Christmas morning was painfully awkward. I came downstairs to find my mother in the kitchen, making coffee with red eyes. My father was in the living room, staring at the Christmas tree like it held answers. Scott was nowhere to be seen, probably hiding in his room. The presents under the tree seemed ridiculous now, these wrapped boxes that were supposed to represent love but just felt empty. My mother tried to make conversation, asking if I slept well, if I wanted breakfast. But her voice was strained, uncertain. She kept looking at me like I was someone new, someone she was meeting for the first time. My father finally came into the kitchen. He cleared his throat. "Lauren, about last night and what I said at dinner." He stopped, the words catching in his throat. The apology was there, trying to form itself, but it was stuck behind years of assumptions and arrogance. I waited, letting the silence push him. But he could not finish. He just looked down at his coffee cup. "It is okay, Dad," I said quietly. But we both knew it was not okay. We both knew something had broken that could not be fixed with a simple sorry. We opened presents in near silence. My father gave me a gift card to a bookstore. My mother gave me a scarf she had knitted. Sweet, thoughtful, but small. The kinds of gifts you give to someone whose life you do not really understand. I gave them what I always gave them. Meaningful, personal gifts that showed I paid attention. A first edition book for my father. A necklace for my mother. Scott finally came downstairs and opened his gifts, but there was no joy in it. The day dragged on. My father kept trying to start conversations with me, then stopping. He would look at me across the room, open his mouth, then close it again. I spent most of the afternoon back in the study, actually working on follow-up items for the Vance project. Around 3 p.m., my father's phone rang. He answered it in his office, but the walls in the old house were thin. His voice carried. "What do you mean you are pulling out? We had an agreement." There was a long pause. "The permits are not my fault. You cannot do this." His voice rose to a shout. "I have expenses. I have commitments based on this deal." Another pause. Then a sound I had never heard from my father. "Defeat." "I understand. Thank you for letting me know." The Dawson deal. Scott's big win. It was dead. My father walked out of his office looking like he had aged 10 years. His face was gray. His shoulders were slumped. He stood in the hallway for a moment, just staring at nothing. Then he seemed to notice me in the study doorway. Our eyes met. He did not go to Scott. He did not call for my mother. He just looked at me. "Lauren," he said, his voice rough and tired. "Arthur Vance. Do you think, would it be possible?" He stopped, struggling. "Could you mention my firm to him? Just as someone who might be able to help with his real estate needs." He was asking me for help. The unsuccessful child. The one with the cute hobby. He was asking me to save him. I felt a complicated rush of emotions. Anger. Pity. Sadness. Power. I walked out of the study and looked at him directly. "Dad, I do not mix my professional relationships with personal favors. It is unethical. My clients trust me because I maintain strict boundaries." I saw the hope drain from his face like water. His shoulders sagged even more. But I continued, and he looked up. "If Walker Realty wants to rebrand to attract higher caliber clients, Apex does offer consultations. You can contact our office like any other potential client." I was offering him a chance, but not a handout, not a favor. He would have to come to me as a client, on my professional ground, and pay for my services like everyone else. My father stared at me for a long moment. I could see him processing what I had said. That I had clients. Real clients. Important clients. That I had an office, a firm, a reputation. That I was not just his daughter playing at design. I was a professional. Someone people paid significant money to work with. "I understand," he said finally. His voice was quiet, almost respectful. It was the first time in my life I had heard that tone from him when he spoke to me. I nodded and went back into the study. Behind me, I heard him walk slowly up the stairs. Later that evening, Scott came to find me. He stood in the doorway of the study, his hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. "I did not know," he said. "About your work. About any of it." I looked at him. "You never asked." He flinched. "Dad always said you were just doing freelance design stuff, making logos for small businesses." I felt a flash of anger. "And you never thought to ask me yourself? To actually learn what I do?" He looked down. I guess I just believed what he said. It was easier than thinking about it. At least he was honest. "Scott, I spent years building my career. I worked on projects you cannot even imagine. And nobody in this family ever cared enough to ask me about it. You just accepted the story Dad told, and you let him make me feel small." He nodded slowly. "I am sorry. It was not enough, but it was something." I left my parents' house the day after Christmas. My mother hugged me at the door, holding on longer than usual. "I am proud of you," she whispered. "I always have been. I just did not know how to show it." I hugged her back. "I know, Mom." My father stood in the hallway, watching. We did not hug. We just looked at each other. "Thank you," he said, "for the advice. About Apex." I nodded. "Just call the main line. Ask for a consultation. They will explain the process." He nodded back. It was the most honest exchange we had ever had. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror at the house getting smaller behind me. I felt lighter, not because of revenge or because I had hurt him, but because the truth was finally out. The burden of being misunderstood was gone. They knew who I was now, and I no longer needed their approval to know my own worth. Over the next few days, I threw myself into the final preparations for the Vance launch. The presentation was scheduled for New Year's Eve, a symbolic beginning for the new fund. I worked constantly, perfecting every detail, making sure everything was flawless. New Year's Eve arrived. The Vance launch party was held in a stunning downtown tower with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It was invitation only, an intimate gathering of investors, board members, and key partners. I wore a simple black dress, elegant and understated. I did not need to be flashy. My work would speak for itself. Arthur Vance greeted me warmly when I arrived. "Lauren, you look lovely. And more importantly, you look confident. As you should be. What we are unveiling tonight is extraordinary." The presentation began at 8 p.m. The lights dimmed, and the brand identity I had created filled the massive screen. The logo, strong and elegant. The color palette, sophisticated and timeless. The messaging, clear and powerful. It was perfect. The room was silent as Arthur Vance walked everyone through the vision, explaining each element, showing how the brand would position the fund in the global market. And then he said something I had not expected. "Before we conclude, I want to acknowledge the brilliant strategist who made this possible. Lauren Walker of Apex. Her insight and execution are what you see before you. Please join me in thanking her." The room erupted in applause. People stood. I felt my face flush as I stood and nodded, acknowledging the recognition. After the presentation, people swarmed me. Investors asked for my card. Other firms asked if I was taking new clients. It was overwhelming and exhilarating. Arthur Vance appeared at my side, creating space for me to breathe. "You have made quite an impression," he said, smiling. "I suspect you will be very busy in the coming year." My phone buzzed in my clutch. I pulled it out and saw a text notification. It was from my father. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity won. The text was a screenshot. It showed an email inquiry form submitted to the Apex website. The name on the form was Frank Walker, Walker Realty. The message below the screenshot read, "I am ready to learn from the expert." I stared at the message for a long time. It was not an apology exactly, but it was an acknowledgement. He was reaching out, on my terms, through my professional channels, treating me like the expert I was. I looked up at the glittering city through the windows. Snow was falling again, covering everything in white, making the world new. My father's toast at Christmas had been meant to diminish me, but it had set in motion a chain of events that revealed the truth. And the truth was that I had never needed his approval. My success was real whether he acknowledged it or not. I typed a response to my father's text. Apex will contact you within 3 business days to schedule an initial consultation. Please be prepared to discuss your goals and budget. It was professional, distant. Exactly what this relationship needed to be going forward. I was not his unsuccessful daughter anymore. I was a professional he was hiring. If he wanted my help, it would be on my terms. I hit send and put my phone away. Around me, the party continued. People celebrated the new fund, the new year, the new possibilities. I grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and walked to the windows. The city spread out below me, millions of lights twinkling in the darkness. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. Your father showed me his inquiry form. I am so proud of you, sweetheart. Not for this, but for who you have always been. I just wish we had seen it sooner. Happy New Year. I felt tears prick my eyes. My mother's love had always been there, just buried under my father's loud opinions. But now she was speaking up. Now she was seeing clearly. I texted back, Happy New Year, Mom. I love you. At midnight, the room counted down together. 10, 9, 8. I thought about where I had been a year ago. Working hard, but feeling invisible. Successful, but unrecognized by the people whose opinions I had valued most. 7, 6, 5. I thought about Christmas dinner and that terrible toast. The words that had cut so deep. 4, 3, 2. And I thought about Arthur Vance knocking on my father's door, looking for me by name. The moment everything changed. 1. Happy New Year. The room erupted in cheers and celebration. Fireworks exploded over the city, lighting up the snowy sky. Arthur Vance raised his glass to me from across the room. I raised mine back. This was my year. This had always been my life. I just finally had witnesses to it. The next morning, I woke up in my own apartment, hungover but happy. My phone had dozens of messages. Congratulations from colleagues. New client inquiries. And one more text from my father, sent at 2 a.m. I was wrong about you. I am sorry. I hope it is not too late to really know my daughter. I read it 3 times. It was the apology I had needed at Christmas. But I did not need it anymore. I had found my worth without it. I spent the first week of the new year working on new projects, including the initial consultation documents for Walker Realty. Yes, I was taking them on as a client. Not because I owed my father anything, but because I was curious. Curious to see if he could learn, if he could change, if he could finally see the world through a different lens. The consultation was scheduled for mid-January. My father and Scott both attended, sitting across from me in a professional conference room at Apex. They looked uncomfortable, out of place. I was in my element. We went through their current brand, their target market, their competition. I was professional, thorough, and honest. Your brand is outdated, I told them bluntly. You are trying to appeal to high-end clients with low-end marketing. Your message is unclear. Your visual identity is weak. If you want to compete at the level you are aspiring to, everything needs to change. My father listened carefully, taking notes. Scott asked smart questions. They were treating me like the expert I was. At the end of the meeting, my father stood and extended his hand. Thank you, Lauren. This is valuable. I am looking forward to working with you. I shook his hand. I will send the proposal next week. As they left, Scott paused at the door. You really are incredible at this, he said quietly. I should have known that a long time ago. I nodded. Yeah, you should have. But I was not angry anymore. I was just done waiting for them to see me. My victory was not in my father's downfall or in his acknowledgement. My victory was in understanding that my success had never needed his toast to be real. It just needed my own quiet belief, one perfect design at a time. The silence about my accomplishments was finally over. and the noise of recognition felt good, but not as good as the quiet confidence I had always carried inside. That had been mine all along,